The gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds into the crimson sky as Beatrice Montgomery hiked up her skirts and ran faster than she ever had in her 22 years of life. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but the pain was nothing compared to the terror of knowing Marshal Whitaker and his men were closing in men who wouldn't rest until she was dead or worse. It was 1876, and the untamed Arizona Territory had no mercy for a woman alone. Especially not one accused of murder. Find that murdering whore. Whitaker's voice boomed through the canyon, bouncing off the red rock walls that towered around her. $500 to the man who brings her to me. Beatrice's lungs burned as she scrambled up the rocky slope, her fingers bleeding as they clawed against stone. Her father's pocket watch, the only thing she had left of him, thumped against her chest with each desperate stride. The wilderness swallowed her as she pushed deeper into the maze of stone, the evening light casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her like ghostly hands. She had been on the run for 3 days, since escaping the jail in Willow Creek. 3 days of little food and less sleep, staying off the trails and moving only at night. But Whitaker was relentless. He had tracked her across 50 miles of rugged country, and now her strength was failing. As twilight deepened into darkness, Beatrice spotted a narrow opening in the canyon wall barely visible unless you were looking right at it. With the last of her energy, she squeezed through the crevice, finding herself in a small cave that smelled of dust and ancient things. She collapsed against the cool stone wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "They won't find me here," she whispered to herself, though she hardly believed it. "Just until morning, then I'll keep moving north." She peeled back her torn sleeve to examine her wound, wincing at the angry red gash. It wasn't deep, but out here, even a small injury could kill. Beatrice tore a strip from her petticoat and bound the wound as best she could in the darkness, her thoughts racing with plans and prayers and memories of the life she'd left behind. The voices of the men hunting her grew fainter as night fully claimed the canyon. Exhaustion washed over her like a wave, and despite her fear, Beatrice's eyes grew heavy. Just a few minutes of rest, she told herself as consciousness slipped away. Just a few minutes. She awoke with a jolt to the sound of hoofbeats. Dawn had barely broken, casting the cave in a ghostly blue light. Beatrice pressed herself deeper into the shadows, hardly daring to breathe as the hoofbeats slowed directly outside her hiding place. There was the creak of leather as someone dismounted, then the sound of boots on stone, a steady, unhurried pace that sent ice through her veins. A shadow fell across the cave entrance. "I know you're in there, madam," a deep voice called, different from Whitaker's harsh bark. This voice was calm, almost gentle, with a hint of Texas in its drawl. "I ain't with the marshal, if that's what you're worried about." Beatrice remained frozen, one hand clutching the small knife she had stolen from the jailhouse kitchen. "I got fresh water and jerky," the voice continued. "And I reckon that bullet wound needs tending to. There's a blood trail leading right to this cave that a blind man could follow." Her heart sank. If this stranger had found her so easily, Whitaker wouldn't be far behind. "I can help you," the man said, "or I can ride away and leave you be. But those men are less than an hour behind me, and they won't be offering choices." Beatrice swallowed hard. "How do I know you're not working for Whitaker?" A low chuckle came from the cave entrance. "If I was working for that snake, I'd have just dragged you out by now." There was a pause then. "My name's Henry Blackwood. I was passing through Willow Creek when they strung up that banker for something he didn't do. Heard about a woman who escaped before they could do the same to her. They say I killed him," Beatrice found herself saying, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Did you?" "No." Another pause. "Well, that's good enough for me. The way I see it, you've got about 10 minutes to decide if I'm worth trusting before those riders come around that bend yonder." Beatrice's mind raced. This man Henry could be lying, but if Whitaker was truly as close as he claimed, she had little choice. With trembling legs, she rose from her hiding place and stepped toward the light, knife held before her. The figure silhouetted against the dawn was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in trail-worn clothes with a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes. As she approached, he stepped back respectfully, giving her space to emerge. When she finally stepped into the light, she got her first clear look at him. Henry Blackwood was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jawline softened by a short beard. His eyes were a startling blue against his weathered face, and they regarded her with neither judgment nor pity, just a steady assessment. "You look half dead, madam," he said simply. "Feel it too," she managed, still keeping the knife between them. He nodded toward her makeshift bandage, now soaked with blood. "That needs cleaning before it festers. My horse is just around the bend. I've got supplies. Why are you helping me?" Beatrice demanded, swaying slightly as a wave of dizziness washed over her. Henry's expression remained unreadable. "Let's just say I've got no love for Marshal Whitaker and the kind of justice he deals." He tilted his head, listening. "We need to move. Now." In the distance, she could hear it too, the faint sound of men and horses. Beatrice hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. "Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood." He turned without another word and strode toward a magnificent buckskin stallion waiting patiently around the corner. Beatrice followed, knife still in hand, wondering if she had just made the worst mistake of her life or perhaps saved it. Henry helped her onto his horse with careful hands, then swung up behind her. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were moving, the horse picking its way through the canyon with sure-footed confidence. They rode in silence, Beatrice acutely aware of the stranger's solid presence at her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the faint scent of tobacco and leather that surrounded him. They climbed higher into the red rock wilderness, following game trails so faint Beatrice would never have spotted them on her own. The sun rose fully, beating down on them with merciless intensity, but Henry seemed unbothered, guiding his horse with the ease of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. "There's a place up ahead," he finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for hours. "Old Trapper's cabin I found years back. We can rest there, tend to that wound." "How do you know this country so well?" Beatrice asked, her voice cracking with thirst. "Spent 5 years as a scout for the army," he replied. "Before that, I ran with a hunting outfit out of Santa Fe. Been all over this territory. And now," there was a pause before he answered, "now I mostly keep to myself, do odd jobs, move on when things get complicated, like helping accused murderers escape the law." There was a bitter edge to her voice that she couldn't quite suppress. She felt rather than saw his shrug. "Law's a funny thing out here. Sometimes it's just a word men like Whitaker hide behind." The cabin appeared before them so suddenly that Beatrice wondered if she had dozed off. It was little more than a crude shelter built against the side of a cliff, half hidden by scrubby pinyon pines. Henry dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Her legs buckled as soon as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her with strong hands. "Easy now," he murmured, steadying her. "You're safe here for the moment." The inside of the cabin was simple but surprisingly clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rough-hewn table and a single chair nearby. A narrow cot stood against the opposite wall, covered with a faded woolen blanket. "Sit," Henry commanded, guiding her to the chair. "I'll fetch water." Beatrice sank down gratefully, watching through the open door as he tended to his horse. She still clutched the knife, though her grip had loosened. If he meant her harm, he'd had ample opportunity already. He returned with a canteen and a battered metal box that he set on the table. "Drink slowly," he warned, handing her the water. "Too much at once will make you sick." She followed his instructions, savoring each small sip as he unpacked the box, revealing bandages, a small bottle of whiskey, and various other supplies. "I need to look at that wound," he said, his tone businesslike. Beatrice hesitated, then set down the knife and extended her arm. Gently, he unwrapped the blood-soaked cloth, his expression grim as the injury was revealed. "Lucky," he pronounced after examining it. "Bullet just grazed you, but it's dirty and there's signs of infection starting." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "This is going to hurt." She nodded, steeling herself. "I can bear it." Henry uncorked the whiskey bottle and held it out. "Take a good swallow first." The liquor burned down her throat, bringing tears to her eyes and warmth to her empty stomach. Then came the true pain as he poured whiskey directly onto the wound. Beatrice bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. "You're doing fine," Henry murmured as he worked, cleaning the wound with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "Just a little more." When he had finished bandaging her arm, he offered her jerky from his saddlebag and more water. Beatrice ate ravenously, only now realizing how desperately hungry she was. "Thank you," she said when she had finally eaten her fill. "I don't understand why you're helping me, but I'm grateful." Henry settled himself on the floor across from her, his back against the wall, hat tipped forward to shade his eyes. "Why don't you tell me your story, miss?" "Montgomery, Beatrice Montgomery," she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But this man had saved her life at considerable risk to his own. She owed him the truth. "I was working as a schoolteacher in Willow Creek, had been for almost a year. The banker, Mr. Hargrove, he took an interest in me." Henry's expression darkened, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I refused his advances, repeatedly. He wasn't used to being denied anything he wanted." Beatrice's fingers twisted in her skirt as she spoke. "3 days ago, I was preparing lessons in the schoolhouse when he came in. He'd been drinking, said if I wouldn't give him what he wanted willingly, he'd take it anyway." She swallowed hard, the memory still raw. "We struggled. He was stronger, but I managed to push him away. He fell and hit his head on the corner of a desk. There was so much blood. I tried to help him, but he was already dead." "Self-defense," Henry said quietly. Marshal Whitaker didn't see it that way. Hargrove was his wife's brother and the richest man in town besides. "They found me with the body, my hands covered in blood. Locked me up straight away, said I'd hang in the morning." Her voice grew hollow. "That night the deputy came to my cell, said he could help me escape if I would." She couldn't finish the sentence. "I understand," Henry said, his voice tight with anger. "What happened then?" "I pretended to agree. When he opened the cell door, I hit him with the water pitcher and ran. Took his keys, his knife, and what money he had. I've been running ever since." She looked up at him, eyes burning with unshed tears. "Now you know, I'm a thief and a killer, Mr. Blackwood." "No," he said firmly, "you're a survivor and call me Henry." For the first time in days, Beatrice felt something like hope flicker within her. "Where will we go from here, Henry?" He considered this, rubbing a hand over his beard. "North, I think, into Utah territory. I know people there who might help, but first you need rest." He nodded toward the cot. "Sleep, I'll keep watch." Exhaustion pulled at her, making her eyelids heavy. "What about you?" A small smile touched his lips. "I've gone days without sleep before. A few more hours won't kill me." Beatrice wanted to protest, to offer to take a turn at watch, but her body betrayed her. She barely made it to the cot before sleep claimed her, deep and dreamless for the first time since her ordeal began. When she awoke, the quality of light told her it was late afternoon. She found Henry at the crude fireplace, stirring something in a battered pot that filled the small cabin with a savory aroma that made her stomach growl. "Good, you're awake," he said without turning. "Rabbit stew, not fancy, but it'll put strength back in you." Beatrice sat up, wincing at her stiff muscles but noting that the pain in her arm had subsided somewhat. "How long was I asleep?" "Better part of 8 hours," Henry replied, spooning stew into a tin cup and handing it to her. "Figured you needed it." She accepted the food gratefully, blowing on it before taking a cautious sip. The simple stew tasted better than any fine restaurant meal she could remember. "Have you seen any sign of Whitaker?" Henry shook his head. "They followed our trail to the river, then lost it. Last I saw, they were heading south, thinking you doubled back. You went out." Beatrice was alarmed at the thought of him risking himself further, "just to high ground with my spyglass. Needed to know where they were." He settled back against the wall, watching her eat. "We'll head out at first light tomorrow. There's a Mormon settlement about 3 days' ride from here. The folks there don't ask many questions and don't much care for territorial lawmen." Beatrice nodded, considering this plan. "And then what? I can't run forever, Henry." "No," he agreed. "But you can run until we find a way to clear your name, or until Whitaker gives up, or until you can start fresh somewhere no one knows your face." "Is that how you live? Always moving on, starting fresh?" Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain. "It has its advantages." "And its costs," she said softly. He didn't deny it. Instead, he changed the subject. "Tell me about your life before Willow Creek." Beatrice set down her empty cup, surprised by his interest. Not much to tell. I was born in Boston. My father was a professor of literature. Mother died when I was young. He raised me alone, taught me to love books and learning. How'd you end up out here? Father died 2 years ago, consumption, left me with his books and debts. She gave a sad smile. I saw an advertisement for a school teacher needed in the Arizona territory. The pay was good and I suppose I wanted adventure, to see something beyond Boston's brick walls. Found more adventure than you bargained for, Henry observed. Yes, Beatrice studied him in the fading light. What about you? Where are you from? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, Texas originally, small ranch outside San Antonio. Pa raised horses, taught me everything I know about them. Ma taught me to read and write, insisted I'd need more than just horse sense in this world. Were they right? A genuine smile broke across his face, transforming his features. Ma usually was, and your father, the smile faded. He died in the war, Confederate cavalry. I was 16. I'm sorry, Beatrice said softly. Henry shrugged. Long time ago now. He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. You should get more rest. I'll take first watch, wake you in a few hours. I've already slept the day away, she protested. You must be exhausted. I'm fine. You're swaying on your feet, Beatrice countered, rising from the cot. Take the bed, Henry. I insist. I'll watch for a while. He looked as though he might argue, then thought better of it. Wake me in 4 hours. No heroics. If you see or hear anything suspicious, get me immediately. I will, she promised. He hesitated, then handed her his revolver. You know how to use this. Beatrice took the weapon, feeling its weight. Father believed women should know how to protect themselves. He taught me. Henry nodded approvingly. Good man, your father. With that, he stretched out on the cot, and within minutes his breathing had slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Beatrice settled herself in the doorway of the cabin, where she could see both the surrounding wilderness and Henry's sleeping form. In the gathering darkness, she found herself studying him more closely than she had dared while he was awake. There was a gentleness to him that his rugged exterior couldn't quite conceal. She had noticed it in the careful way he tended her wound, in his respect for her space and choices, in the absence of judgment when she told her story. She wondered what experiences had shaped him, what sorrows had etched the fine lines around his eyes that were visible only when he smiled. The night deepened around them, stars emerging in brilliant profusion across the vast desert sky. An owl called somewhere nearby, and the wind whispered through the scrubby pines. Beatrice found peace in these sounds, so different from the ceaseless noise of town or the oppressive silence of her jail cell. When the 4 hours had passed, she found herself reluctant to wake Henry. He slept so soundly, his face relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake. But she had promised, and she suspected he was the type of man who took promises seriously. Henry, she called softly, keeping a respectful distance from the cot. It's time. He woke instantly, fully alert, one hand already reaching for the revolver that wasn't there. When he saw her holding it, he relaxed slightly. All quiet, not even a coyote, she confirmed. The stars are beautiful tonight. He rose and stretched, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. Get some sleep now, dawn comes early. Beatrice hesitated. Thank you, Henry, for everything. In the darkness, she couldn't quite read his expression. Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long road ahead. She nodded and moved to the cot, settling herself on the thin mattress that still held his warmth. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering what it would be like to have a permanent place in the world again. A home, safety, perhaps even someone to share it with. Such dangerous thoughts for a woman on the run, she chided herself. But they followed her into her dreams nonetheless. True to Henry's word, they set out at first light, leaving the small cabin as they had found it. He had repacked his supplies with efficient care, ensuring that nothing was left behind to mark their passing. Beatrice watched him work, admiring the economy of his movements and his obvious skill at wilderness survival. The fever's gone from your eyes, he observed as he helped her mount the buckskin. How's the arm feel? Better, she admitted. Still sore, but the pain is less sharp. Good, we've got rough country ahead. He swung up behind her, and once again they were moving, the horse picking its way down from the high canyon into a broader valley below. They rode in companionable silence for most of the morning. Beatrice gradually relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid presence of Henry at her back. Around midday, he reined in beside a small stream that cut through the red earth. "Time to rest the horse and ourselves," he said, dismounting and offering his hand to help her down. As they sat in the sparse shade of a juniper tree, sharing dried apples and the last of the jerky, Beatrice found herself watching Henry's hands strong and capable, yet surprisingly gentle. When he caught her looking, she blushed and quickly turned her gaze to the distant mountains. "Something on your mind?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was wondering how someone like you ends up alone, moving from place to place." A shadow passed over his face. "That's a long story. We have time," she said softly, "unless you'd rather not tell it." Henry was silent for so long that she thought he had chosen not to answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I was married once. Her name was Sarah. We had a small ranch in Colorado Territory." Beatrice felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, quickly replaced by curiosity. "What happened?" "Diphtheria. 8 years ago now." His jaw tightened. "Took her and our baby girl within a week of each other." "Oh, Henry," she reached out instinctively, placing her hand over his. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at their hands, then gently turned his palm up to clasp her fingers. "After that, I couldn't stand the silence of that ranch. Sold it. Tried settling in a few other places over the years, but nothing ever felt right." His blue eyes met hers, full of a sorrow he usually kept well hidden. "So I keep moving. Easier that way." The warmth of his hand around hers sent a strange flutter through Beatrice's chest. "And is it easier?" "Most days." His thumb traced a small circle on her wrist, perhaps unconsciously. "Not always." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility. Before either could speak again, Henry's head snapped up, his posture suddenly alert. In one fluid motion, he released her hand and stood. "Riders," he said tersely, reaching for his spyglass. Coming fast from the east, Beatrice rose quickly, her heart racing. "Whitaker?" Henry studied the approaching dust cloud, his expression grim. "Can't tell yet, but we're not waiting to find out." He collapsed the spyglass and helped her quickly onto the horse. "There's a box canyon about 2 miles west. Good place to hide, bad place to be trapped. Let's hope they pass us by." They rode hard, the buckskin responding magnificently to Henry's urging. Beatrice clung to the saddle horn, fear lending her strength as they galloped across the open country toward the distant cliffs. Behind them, the riders had changed course. They were being pursued. "They've spotted us," Henry called over the pounding of hooves. "Hold tight." He pushed the horse faster, heading for a narrow gap in the red rock wall that loomed before them. As they plunged into the shadowy passage, Beatrice could hear shouts echoing behind them. The canyon closed around them like protective arms, the walls rising sheer on either side, limiting their pursuers to approaching single file. Henry guided the buckskin deeper into the maze of stone, following twists and turns that seemed random to Beatrice, but clearly followed some plan in his mind. Finally, they emerged into a small hidden valley, completely encircled by towering cliffs except for the narrow passage they had used. "This is your box canyon?" Beatrice asked as they dismounted, her legs trembling from the hard ride. "Not yet," Henry replied, leading the horse quickly across the valley floor to where a trickle of water emerged from the cliff face. "This is just the antechamber." Following the water source, he led her to what appeared to be a dead end, until Beatrice noticed the narrow crevice hidden behind a cascade of hanging vines. Henry pushed these aside, revealing a passage just wide enough for the horse to squeeze through. "The Navajo used to hide here from the Spanish," he explained as they entered a truly hidden box canyon beyond a secret garden of sorts, with a small spring-fed pool at its center surrounded by surprising greenery. "Later, outlaws found it. Not many know of it now." "It's beautiful," Beatrice breathed, taking in the unexpected oasis. "And defensible," Henry added practically, already unsaddling the horse. "Only one way in or out. If Whitaker's men find the passage, we'll hear them coming." They made camp quickly, with the efficiency of those who know danger is close. Henry built a small, nearly smokeless fire using dry sage and juniper, while Beatrice tended to the horse. When darkness fell, they sat close to the fire's meager warmth, listening for any sound of pursuit. "Do you think we lost them?" Beatrice asked, her voice hushed in the stillness of the hidden canyon. "For now, maybe," Henry replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "But Whitaker's a stubborn man with a reputation to protect. He won't give up easily." "I've cost you so much already," she said softly. "You could have been miles away by now, safe." He looked at her then, really looked at her, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "I made my choice, Beatrice. I don't regret it." Something in his voice made her breath catch. "Why?" "You barely know me." Henry was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "When I saw you come out of that cave exhausted, hurt, but still fighting, I saw something I recognized." He met her eyes again. Courage and something worth protecting. Beatrice felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spread through her. "I'm not sure I deserve such faith." "You do." His voice was certain. "I've known plenty of men who'd have broken under half what you've endured." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps it's simply that I haven't had the luxury of breaking." "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Or perhaps you're stronger than you know." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Beatrice found herself acutely aware of how close they sat, of the firelight playing across his strong features, of how his eyes lingered on her face. A sudden noise from beyond the hidden entrance shattered the moment. Henry was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, motioning for her to stay back. "Could be just an animal," he whispered, though his tense posture suggested he thought otherwise. They waited in taut silence, straining to hear. After what seemed an eternity, voices carried faintly to them, men arguing, too distant to make out words but close enough to confirm their fears. Whitaker's men had found the outer valley. "They're searching," Henry murmured, moving silently to the crevice entrance. "Haven't found the passage yet." Beatrice joined him, careful to make no sound. Through the narrow opening, they could see torchlight moving across the outer valley as several men methodically explored its perimeter. "What if they find us?" she whispered, fear knotting her stomach. Henry's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing reassuringly. "They won't." "But if they do, I'll handle it." They stood together in the shadows, watching the search progress. Minutes stretched into an hour, and still the men combed the outer valley, growing visibly frustrated as their torches illuminated nothing but solid rock walls. Finally, a commanding voice that Beatrice recognized with a chill as Marshal Whitaker's called out. "They're not here. Must have doubled back while we were following their false trail. Mount up, we'll try the North Pass." Gradually, the torchlight receded and the sound of horses faded into the night. Still, Henry maintained his vigilant watch for another hour before relaxing slightly. "They're gone for now," he said, holstering his revolver. "But they'll be back with daylight." "We should move on," Beatrice suggested. Already dreading another day of hard riding, Henry shook his head. "Too risky tonight. The horse needs rest, and so do you. Besides, they'll be watching the obvious escape routes." He guided her back to the fire, which had burned down to glowing embers. "We'll leave before dawn, head north through the high country where they won't expect us." They settled back by the fire, the tension of the close call still evident in Henry's alert posture. Impulsively, Beatrice touched his arm. "Thank you, again." He looked down at her hand, then covered it with his own. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Beatrice." "I know," she said softly, "but I want to." Their eyes met in the dying firelight, and something changed in Henry's expression, a softening, a surrender to something he had been fighting. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant to question more than a demand. Beatrice answered by sliding her hand to his shoulder, drawing him closer as warmth blossomed within her. His beard was softer than she had imagined against her skin, his lips surprisingly tender for a man who lived such a hard life. When they finally broke apart, Henry's eyes searched hers, uncertainty visible despite the darkness. "I shouldn't have done that," he began. "Yes, you should," she countered, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I'm glad you did." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Still, the timing could be better, with Whitaker hunting us and all. When is timing ever perfect?" Beatrice asked, suddenly bold in a way she had never been before. Perhaps it was the nearness of death that made life and connection seem so precious. Henry laughed softly, the sound rich and warm in the quiet canyon. Fair point. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. We should get some sleep. Long day ahead tomorrow. They lay down near the fire, close enough to share warmth but with a respectable distance between them. Despite the danger that waited beyond their hidden sanctuary, Beatrice found herself drifting toward sleep with a strange sense of peace, the memory of Henry's kiss following her into dreams. True to his word, Henry woke her before the first hint of dawn touched the sky. They broke camp silently, erasing all signs of their presence from the hidden canyon. The horse, refreshed after a night of rest and good grazing, seemed eager to move on. We'll follow the high ridges north, Henry explained as they prepared to leave their sanctuary. Harder traveling, but less chance of being spotted. The journey he proposed was indeed challenging. They climbed steadily through terrain that seemed impossible for a horse to navigate, yet the buckskin managed with sure-footed determination. By midday, they had reached a vantage point that allowed them to see for miles in every direction. There, Henry pointed to a distant dust cloud moving along the valley floor far below. Whitaker's men still searching the lowlands. Beatrice felt a surge of hope. They have no idea where we are. Let's keep it that way, he replied with a small smile. 3 more days of this and we'll reach the Mormon settlement. After that, we can decide our next move. They continued their journey through the rugged highlands, stopping only when necessary to rest the horse or to eat sparingly from their dwindling supplies. As the day wore on, Beatrice found herself studying Henry with new eyes, noting the strength in his hands as he guided the horse, the quiet competence with which he read the land, the unexpected tenderness in his gaze when it fell on her. That night, they made camp in a sheltered hollow beneath an overhanging cliff. With no pursuit in sight, Henry risked a slightly larger fire, even taking time to brew coffee in a small pot he carried in his saddlebags. Luxury, he called it with a wink as he handed her a tin cup of the strong, bitter brew. Beatrice accepted it gratefully, savoring both the warmth and the rare moment of normalcy. I haven't had coffee since the night before everything happened. Henry settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Tell me more about your teaching, you must have been good at it. The simple question opened a flood of memories, her small schoolhouse with its rows of rough-hewn desks, the children's faces as they mastered a difficult lesson, the satisfaction of watching young minds grow. As she spoke, Beatrice realized how much she had loved that work, despite its challenges. The hardest part was convincing some of the parents that their daughters needed education as much as their sons, she explained, especially when it came to anything beyond basic reading and figures. Henry listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. When she finally fell silent, he said quietly, "You miss it." "Yes," she admitted, "very much. You'll teach again," he said with certainty. "Once this is over." The confidence in his voice warmed her more than the fire. "Do you really believe that's possible, that this can end well?" "I do." He set down his coffee cup and took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Beatrice, I've been thinking. I have friends in Colorado, good people who would help us. The territorial governor there is a fair man who might listen to your story, especially with witnesses to speak to your character." "Witnesses? Who would speak for me?" "I would," Henry said simply. "And I know others who would stand against Whitaker if asked." The man has made plenty of enemies over the years. Hope fluttered in Beatrice's chest, fragile but persistent. That sounds like a real chance." "It is." He hesitated, then continued. "There's land available there too, good land. A man could build something worthwhile." The implication hung in the air between them. Beatrice looked at their joined hands, then up at Henry's face, finding vulnerability there that he rarely showed. "Are you thinking of settling down, Henry Blackwood?" she asked softly. A small smile touched his lips. "I'm thinking it might be time to stop running, if I had reason enough to stay in one place." Beatrice's heart quickened. "And would I be reason enough?" Instead of answering with words, Henry leaned forward and kissed her again, more confidently this time, with a warmth that spoke of deeper feelings than either had yet dared to name. When they broke apart, his eyes held a promise. "More than enough," he whispered against her lips. That night, they slept closer together, Henry's arm protectively around Beatrice as the stars wheeled overhead. For the first time since fleeing Willow Creek, she dreamed not of pursuit and fear, but of possibility and hope. Dawn brought clear skies and renewed determination. They set out early, continuing their journey north through the high country. As they rode, Henry shared more of his knowledge of the land, pointing out plants that could be eaten or used for medicine, showing her how to read the subtle signs of water in this seemingly barren landscape. "How did you learn all this?" Beatrice asked, genuinely impressed by the depth of his wilderness knowledge. "Some from my father," Henry replied. "More from an old Comanche man who worked our ranch when I was a boy. Rest I picked up along the way, mostly by making mistakes and living to tell about them." "Well, I'm grateful for every mistake that taught you something useful," she said, leaning back slightly against his chest. "I wouldn't have survived 2 days out here on my own." His arm tightened briefly around her waist. "You're tougher than you give yourself credit for." They rode in companionable silence for a time, each lost in thought. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the red rock giving way to higher elevations with scrubby pine forests and occasional meadows bright with wildflowers. Around midday, they paused to rest in one such meadow, allowing the horse to graze while they shared a meal of the last of their dried fruit and some fresh greens Henry had gathered along the way. "We should reach a trading post by tomorrow evening," he said as they ate. "Can resupply there. Maybe even get news about Whitaker's movements." Beatrice nodded, then hesitated before asking a question that had been on her mind. "Henry, what happens when we reach the Mormon settlement? Will you stay with me?" He looked surprised at the question. "Of course. I wouldn't leave you alone, Beatrice. I know you have your own life, your own path," she continued, needing to say what was in her heart. "I don't want you to feel obligated because of what's happened between us." Henry set down the piece of jerky he'd been eating and took both her hands in his. "Look at me," he said gently. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "What's happened between us isn't obligation. It's the first time in 8 years that I've felt truly alive again." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I'm with you because there's nowhere else I want to be. Because when I'm with you, the world makes sense again. Because you make me believe in possibilities I'd given up on." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes. "I feel the same," she whispered, "and it terrifies me. Everything is so uncertain, my future, my freedom. I have nothing to offer you, Henry." "Nothing but trouble. You offer me everything that matters," he countered, brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Hope, purpose, a chance at happiness again," he smiled slightly. "As for trouble, I seem to find that easily enough on my own." She laughed softly through her tears. "That's true enough." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "Let's make a pact, you and I. No more worrying about what might happen. We take each day as it comes together. Deal?" "Deal," she agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that held all the promise of their uncertain but hopeful future. They were preparing to move on when Henry suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the forest edge. Beatrice followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "What is it?" she whispered, instantly alert to the change in his demeanor. "Someone's watching us," he murmured, his hand dropping casually to his holstered revolver. "Don't look around. Act natural while I get the horse." Heart pounding, Beatrice tried to follow his instructions, continuing to gather their few belongings while Henry moved toward the buckskin. Before he reached the animal, however, a voice called from the trees. "That's far enough, mister. Hands where I can see them." Henry froze, then slowly raised his hands. "We're just travelers passing through. No need for trouble." A man emerged from the forest edge, rifle trained steadily on Henry. He was older, perhaps 50, with a gray streaked beard and the weathered look of someone who lived rough. 2 more men appeared behind him, similarly armed. "Travelers, huh?" the older man said skeptically. "Kind of off the usual trails, aren't you? We prefer the scenic route," Henry replied evenly, his posture relaxed despite the weapons pointed at him. The older man's eyes shifted to Beatrice, narrowing slightly. Lady, you look mighty familiar. Seen your face somewhere before. Beatrice's blood ran cold. Had Whitaker circulated wanted posters already? She forced herself to remain calm. I doubt it, sir. I'm not from these parts. The man studied her a moment longer, then gestured with his rifle. Both of you come with us, nice and easy. Henry's eyes met Beatrice's briefly, conveying a silent message. Stay calm. Follow my lead. Where are we going? Henry asked as they were directed to collect their horse and belongings. Our camp, the older man replied curtly. Got some questions that need answering. With no choice but to comply, they followed their captors through the forest to a well-hidden camp nestled in a small valley. Several crude cabins stood in a rough circle around a central fire pit, with horses corralled nearby. Women and children paused in their tasks to watch the newcomers with wary curiosity. Family settlement, Henry asked casually as they were led to the largest cabin. The older man grunted an affirmative. McAllister clan. Been in these mountains 3 generations. Inside the cabin, they were directed to sit at a rough-hewn table while the older man, clearly the patriarch, sent one of his companions to fetch someone called Eliza. Now then, he said, settling across from them with his rifle still close at hand. Let's start with your names and what brings you through our territory. Henry answered smoothly, giving their real first names but false surnames, spinning a tale about heading north to visit relatives in Utah. Beatrice marveled at his ability to lie convincingly, while maintaining an air of perfect honesty. Before the questioning could continue, the cabin door opened to admit a tiny, white-haired woman, whose appearance belied the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She moved directly to Beatrice, studying her with unnerving intensity. It is her, Pa, the woman, presumably Eliza, declared after a moment. She's the schoolteacher from the wanted poster, the one who killed that banker down in Willow Creek. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face as Henry tensed beside her, his hand inching toward his holstered gun. I wouldn't, the patriarch warned, his rifle already trained on Henry. Not unless you want to die right here. Please, Beatrice found her voice. It wasn't murder. It was self-defense. He attacked me and I save it, the old man interrupted. Eliza, fetch that poster. Let's see what the reward is for turning in a murderer and her accomplice. As Eliza left to comply, Beatrice felt despair washing over her. After everything they had endured, to be captured not by Whitaker, but by strangers seeking reward money seemed a cruel twist of fate. Henry's voice was steady when he spoke. Mr. McAllister, I understand you're thinking of the welfare of your family. But there's more to this story than what's on that poster. There always is, the old man replied dryly. Don't much matter to me. Law's the law. Even when the law is wrong, Beatrice challenged, finding courage in desperation. Even when the law serves the powerful at the expense of the innocent. Something flickered in the old man's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory. Before he could respond, Eliza returned with a crumpled paper that she handed to her father. McAllister studied the poster, his expression unreadable. Wanted for the murder of Edward Hargrove, respected banker and citizen, he read aloud. Beatrice Montgomery, schoolteacher. $500 reward for capture, dead or alive, says here you stabbed him in cold blood. That's a lie, Beatrice said fiercely. He attacked me, we struggled. He fell and hit his head. Convenient story, McAllister commented, though something in his tone had shifted slightly. It's the truth, Henry insisted. Marshall Whitaker is Hargrove's brother-in-law. He wants vengeance, not justice. McAllister's eyes narrowed. Whitaker, Thomas Whitaker. Henry nodded cautiously. You know him. The old man exchanged a look with his daughter before answering. We've had dealings, none of them pleasant. He set down the poster, his weathered fingers tapping thoughtfully against the table. Still, harboring fugitives is a serious matter. Especially with children in our settlement. We won't stay long, Beatrice pleaded. Just one night, then we'll be on our way and you'll never see us again. McAllister studied them both for a long moment, his gaze shrewd and assessing. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. Eliza, see that our guests are fed. Put them in the back cabin for the night. We'll decide what to do with them in the morning. Relief flooded through Beatrice, though she knew they weren't safe yet. As they were led from the main cabin to a smaller one at the edge of the settlement, Henry managed to whisper, "Be ready to move quickly if necessary." The back cabin was simple but clean, with a single bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a small fireplace. More importantly, Beatrice noted, it had only one door and a single window easily watched by their captors. Eliza brought them a surprisingly good meal of stew and cornbread, her manner not unfriendly despite the circumstances. "Pa will want to talk more with you in the morning," she said as she set down the food. "Best to tell him the whole truth. He can smell a lie like others smell smoke." After she left, securing the door behind her, Henry moved to the window, assessing their situation. "2 men watching," he reported quietly. "Armed, they're taking no chances." "Do you think they'll turn us in?" Beatrice asked, her appetite gone despite the savory aroma of the stew. Henry joined her at the table, keeping his voice low. "Hard to say. McAllister clearly has no love for Whitaker, but $500 is a lot of money for a family living this rough. What do we do? For now, we eat and rest. Stay alert." He took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "Whatever happens, we face it together." They ate in silence, both lost in thought. As night fell, the small cabin grew cold, and Henry built a fire in the fireplace. The simple domesticity of the act, his careful arrangement of the logs, the way he coaxed the flames to life struck Beatrice with unexpected poignancy. In another life, in another place, they might have been doing this in their own home, with no fear hanging over them. "What are you thinking?" Henry asked, noticing her wistful expression as he joined her on the edge of the bed, the only place to sit besides the hard wooden chairs. "Just imagining a different life," she admitted. "One where we met under normal circumstances, where I wasn't running for my life and you weren't risking yours to help me." He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway." "Some things are meant to be, Beatrice." "Do you really believe that?" she asked, leaning into his touch. "I'm starting to," he murmured, drawing her closer. Their kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, laden with all the emotions that had built between them over their journey together. Beatrice's hands slid up to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him as he cradled her face with a gentleness that made her heart ache. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he whispered, "when you're safe and free, I want to build a life with you, Beatrice Montgomery, if you'll have me." Tears welled in her eyes at the simple, heartfelt proposal. "There's nothing I want more," she answered truthfully. They held each other close as the fire burned low, speaking softly of dreams and possibilities, finding solace in each other despite the uncertainty that awaited them in the morning. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound of approaching footsteps. Henry was instantly alert, positioning himself protectively in front of Beatrice as the door swung open to reveal McAllister, accompanied by 2 armed men. "Come with me," the patriarch ordered without preamble. "Both of you." They followed him across the settlement to the main cabin, where they found breakfast laid out on the table and several other members of the clan already gathered. To Beatrice's surprise, they were invited to sit and eat, the atmosphere noticeably less tense than the previous evening. As they ate, McAllister studied them thoughtfully before finally speaking. "I've been thinking about your situation all night," he began, "and I've decided to hear your full story before making any decisions." Hope kindled in Beatrice's chest. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister." The old man nodded curtly. "Start from the beginning, and remember what my daughter told you. I can smell a lie." Taking a deep breath, Beatrice recounted everything: her time in Willow Creek, Hargrove's unwanted advances, the fatal confrontation, her escape from jail, and the relentless pursuit by Whitaker and his men. As she spoke, other family members drifted into the cabin, listening silently. When she finished, McAllister turned to Henry. "And you, what's your stake in this?" Henry met the old man's gaze steadily. "I believe in her innocence, and I love her." The simple declaration hung in the air for a moment before McAllister nodded, as if it was exactly the answer he had expected. He turned to a middle-aged woman sitting nearby. "Martha, what do you think?" The woman who Beatrice guessed was his daughter or daughter-in-law spoke decisively. I believe her, Pa. No woman makes up a story like that, and we all know what kind of man Whitaker is. McAllister grunted, then addressed the room at large. Anyone here think we should turn them over to Whitaker? Silence greeted his question. After a moment, Eliza spoke up from her place near the fire. Thomas Whitaker drove us from our homestead in the valley 15 years ago. Said our claim wasn't legal, took everything we had built there. Her voice was bitter with old anger. I'd sooner help the devil himself than give that man anything he wants. Murmurs of agreement filled the cabin. McAllister raised a hand for silence, then turned back to Beatrice and Henry. Seems the family has spoken, he said gruffly. We won't be turning you in. More than that, will help you get safely to the Mormon settlement. Beatrice gasped, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Thank you, she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you all. Don't thank us yet, McAllister cautioned. Whitaker's men have been seen in these parts. Getting you north won't be simple. He gestured to a young man nearby. Jacob here will guide you through the high passes. There's a route known only to our family that will keep you well away from the usual trails. Henry extended his hand to the patriarch. We're in your debt, sir. McAllister accepted the handshake with a firm grip. No debt. Consider it payment toward the one Whitaker still owes us. He nodded toward Jacob. You'll leave at dusk. Less chance of being spotted that way. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of preparations. The McAllisters provided them with fresh supplies, warmer clothing for the high country, and even a second horse, a sturdy mountain pony for Beatrice to ride. Can't travel fast with two on one horse, Martha explained practically as she helped Beatrice pack the saddlebags. Besides, Daisy here knows these mountains better than any human guide. As they worked, Beatrice found herself welcomed into the women's circle, their initial suspicion replaced by a practical acceptance that touched her deeply. They shared stories of their own hardships and triumphs, of lives built in this remote wilderness through sheer determination and family loyalty. How do you do it? Beatrice asked Martha as they folded blankets together. Lives so far from everything, facing such challenges every day. The older woman smiled, lines crinkling around her eyes. Same way you've survived your troubles, I expect, one day at a time with courage and hope. She glanced meaningfully toward the men's side of the camp, where Henry was deep in conversation with Jacob and McAllister. And it helps to have someone worthy standing beside you. By the time dusk fell, they were ready to depart. The entire McAllister clan gathered to see them off, with even the children offering shy farewells. McAllister himself presented Henry with a rifle. Better to have it and not need it, the old man said simply. As they prepared to mount up, Eliza approached Beatrice with a small bundle. Herbs, she explained, for healing and for strength. And this, she pressed a tarnished silver pendant into Beatrice's hand. My mother's. Said to protect travelers. I reckon you need it more than me now. Deeply moved, Beatrice impulsively embraced the older woman. I'll treasure it, she promised, and I'll never forget your kindness. With final farewells exchanged, they set off into the gathering darkness, Jacob leading the way on his own hardy mountain horse. As the lights of the settlement faded behind them, Beatrice felt a curious mixture of gratitude and apprehension. They had found unexpected allies, yet the most dangerous part of their journey still lay ahead. They traveled through the night, Jacob setting a careful pace through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate without his expert guidance. The moon provided just enough light to see by, casting the landscape in silver and shadow. How far to the Mormon settlement? Henry asked during a brief rest to water the horses. 3 days if all goes well, Jacob replied, his voice hushed in the night stillness. Maybe 4 with the passes this time of year. Snow's still deep up top. Beatrice tried to hide her concern at this news. April in the lowlands might feel like spring, but in the high mountains, winter held on with stubborn fingers. Henry must have sensed her worry, for he moved his horse alongside hers as they continued their journey. Cold doesn't frighten me if it means safety for you, he said quietly. We'll manage. She smiled at him in the darkness, drawing strength from his steady presence. Together, she agreed. Jacob proved to be not only an excellent guide but a valuable companion as well. Though initially reserved, he gradually opened up as they traveled. sharing knowledge of the land and its creatures that had been passed down through generations of his family. By dawn, they had climbed high enough that Beatrice could look back and see the vast expanse of canyon country spread out below them like a crimson sea. The sight was breathtaking, and despite her exhaustion, she felt a surge of exhilaration at the wild beauty of it. Never gets old, does it? Jacob commented, noticing her appreciation. It's magnificent, she agreed. I've never seen anything like it. They made camp in a sheltered hollow as the sun rose fully, intending to rest through the day and continue their journey at nightfall. As Jacob prepared a small, nearly smokeless fire, Henry scouted the surrounding area, returning with a satisfied nod. No sign of pursuit, he reported. I think we've given Whitaker the slip for now. For the first time in days, Beatrice allowed herself to truly relax, the combination of safety and exhaustion overtaking her as she huddled in her blankets near the fire. She was vaguely aware of Henry settling beside her, his arm drawing her close as sleep claimed her. She dreamed of a small cabin surrounded by pine trees, of a garden bathed in golden light, of children's laughter and Henry's smile. When she woke hours later, the dream lingered, feeling less like fantasy and more like a promise. Jacob was already awake, preparing a simple meal of cornbread and dried meat. We should reach the first high pass by midnight, he explained as they ate. It's the trickiest part of the journey, narrow trail, steep drops, but once we're through, we'll be in territory Whitaker's men rarely venture. Henry nodded, his expression thoughtful. And after the Mormon settlement, what then? Jacob shrugged. Pa mentioned you were thinking of Colorado territory. Good choice. Governor, there's no friend to men like Whitaker, and there's fine land available for those willing to work it. That's what I've heard, Henry agreed, his eyes meeting Beatrice's. Land enough to build a home, maybe a school someday. The simple statement, with all it implied about their future together, warmed Beatrice more than the fire before them. I'd like that, she said softly. As dusk fell, they packed up camp and resumed their journey, climbing steadily higher into the mountains. The air grew noticeably colder, their breath forming clouds in the moonlight. The trail narrowed, sometimes barely wide enough for the horses to pass single file. Watch your step here, Jacob cautioned as they approached a particularly treacherous section. Trail drops off about 300 feet on the right. Horses know the way, so give them their head. Beatrice swallowed hard, fighting vertigo as she glimpsed the yawning darkness beyond the trail's edge. She focused on the steady movement of her mount beneath her, trusting the sure-footed animal as Jacob had advised. They were halfway across the exposed section when a sound froze them all in place, the distant but unmistakable report of a rifle, followed by the ping of a bullet striking stone nearby. Down, Henry shouted, already sliding from his horse and pulling Beatrice with him. They crouched against the cliff face as more shots rang out, echoing confusingly among the mountains. How did they find us? Beatrice gasped, terror constricting her throat. Must have spotted our movement against the skyline, Jacob replied grimly, his rifle already in his hands. Hard to tell how many or exactly where they are with these echoes. Henry peered cautiously around the bend. Can't stay here, we're too exposed. He turned to Jacob. How far to better cover? Half a mile to a stand of pines, the young guide answered. But we'd have to cross open ground to reach it. Another shot ricocheted off the cliff above them, sending stone fragments raining down. Henry made a quick decision. Jacob, take Beatrice. I'll provide covering fire. Get her to those trees and keep moving. No. Beatrice protested, clutching his arm. I won't leave you. Henry cupped her face with one hand, his eyes intense in the moonlight. I'll be right behind you, I promise, but you need to go now. Before she could argue further, Jacob grabbed her arm. He's right, come on. With a last desperate look at Henry, Beatrice allowed Jacob to pull her toward the horses, which were stamping nervously at the gunfire. They mounted quickly, Jacob leading her horse by the reins as they broke from cover and galloped toward the distant trees. Behind them, Henry began firing methodically, forcing their pursuers to take cover. Beatrice looked back once to see him mounting his own horse, still returning fire as he urged the animal forward. The ride to the tree line seemed to take an eternity, bullets kicking up dust around them as Whitaker's men recovered and returned fire. Just as they reached the relative safety of the pines, Beatrice heard Henry cry out behind them. Turning in her saddle, her heart nearly stopped as she saw him slumped forward over his horse's neck, the animal running on without guidance. "Henry," she screamed, already turning her mount back toward him. Jacob grabbed her reins. "No, you'll both be killed." Instead, he spurred his own horse out of the trees, racing to intercept Henry's mount before it could veer off the trail. Beatrice watched in agonizing suspense as Jacob reached Henry's horse, grabbing the reins and guiding both animals back to the cover of the pines. Henry was conscious but pale, blood soaking the left side of his shirt. "Just a graze," he gasped as they helped him dismount. "Knocked the wind out of me." But when they got his shirt open, the wound was clearly more serious, a deep furrow across his ribs that bled freely. "We need to stop the bleeding," Beatrice said, fighting to keep her voice steady as she pressed her makeshift bandage against the wound. Jacob was already scanning their surroundings. "There's a cave system not far from here. Used it before when caught in bad weather. We can hole up there, tend to him properly." With Beatrice supporting Henry on one side and Jacob on the other, they managed to get him back on his horse. The going was slow through the dense pine forest, every jolt obviously causing Henry pain, though he made no complaint. By the time they reached the cave entrance, a narrow opening in a rocky hillside, Henry was alarmingly pale, his skin clammy with shock. Inside, they found a space large enough to accommodate them and the horses, with a small underground spring providing fresh water. Working quickly by the light of Jacob's small lantern, Beatrice cleaned Henry's wound using the herbs Eliza had given her. The bullet had carved a deep channel across his ribs, but had miraculously missed anything vital. "Lucky," Jacob pronounced after examining the injury. "Another inch to the right and it would have punctured your lung." Henry managed a weak smile. "Always been lucky," he murmured, his eyes finding Beatrice's. "Especially lately." Once the wound was bandaged, they made Henry as comfortable as possible on a bed of pine boughs. Jacob volunteered to take first watch at the cave entrance, giving them privacy, alone with Henry. Beatrice finally allowed her composure to crack, tears streaming down her face as she held his hand. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. He squeezed her fingers weakly. "Takes more than one bullet to keep me from my promises, Beatrice Montgomery." She smiled through her tears, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Rest now. We're safe for the moment." As Henry drifted into uneasy sleep, Beatrice maintained her vigil beside him, alternating between prayer and planning. By morning, his fever had risen alarmingly, his skin hot to the touch as infection set in despite their best efforts. "We need to get him to real help," she told Jacob anxiously. "He needs a doctor." The young guide's expression was grim. "Nearest doctors at the Mormon settlement, still 2 days' hard ride from here." He hesitated. "And Whitaker's men are still out there searching." "I don't care," Beatrice said fiercely. "We can't just let him die here because of me." Jacob studied her determined face, then nodded slowly. "There might be another way. My cousin married into a Ute family. Their winter camp isn't far from here. They have healers with knowledge of wounds like this." Hope flickered in Beatrice's heart. "Can you find them?" "Yes, but..." Jacob looked uncertain. "Relations between our families and theirs have been strained lately. Land disputes, they might not welcome us." "We have to try," Beatrice insisted, looking down at Henry's flushed face. "Please, Jacob." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "I'll go faster alone. Keep your rifle ready and stay hidden. I'll be back by nightfall with help or with news." After Jacob departed, Beatrice maintained her watch over Henry, bathing his face with cool water from the spring and trying to get him to drink when he was conscious enough. The hours dragged by with excruciating slowness. Each labored breath he took both a relief and a worry. "Don't you dare leave me now, Henry Blackwood," she whispered fiercely as she changed his bandage, wincing at the angry red inflammation around the wound. "Not when we're so close to our new beginning." Whether it was her voice or her touch, Henry stirred, his eyes opening to focus hazily on her face. "Beatrice," he murmured, "are you all right?" Even now, his first thought was for her safety. The realization brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Jacob's gone for help, you just need to hold on a little longer." He nodded weakly, then his expression grew more urgent. If I don't say it, she interrupted, pressing her fingers gently to his lips. You're going to be fine. Henry caught her hand, holding it with surprising strength. Listen to me, if something happens, papers in my saddlebag, deed to land in Colorado, it's yours no matter what. Promise you'll use it. Build that school. Beatrice shook her head, tears flowing freely now. We'll build it together or not at all. I'm not giving up on you, Henry. I love you too much to let you go. A smile touched his cracked lips. Say that again. I love you, she repeated, leaning down to press her forehead to his. More than I thought possible, so you have to fight. For me. For us? For us, he echoed softly before slipping back into unconsciousness. The remainder of the day passed in anxious vigil, with Beatrice dividing her attention between caring for Henry and watching the cave entrance for any sign of Jacob's return or of Whitaker's men. As dusk approached with no sign of help, despair began to creep in. Henry's fever had worsened, his breathing increasingly labored. Beatrice found herself making desperate bargains with God as she bathed his burning forehead. Just when she had nearly given up hope, she heard movement outside the cave. Grabbing Henry's revolver, she positioned herself protectively in front of him, heart hammering as footsteps approached. To her immense relief, it was Jacob who appeared in the entrance, accompanied by an older Native American man with a weathered face and keen eyes. Behind them came two younger men carrying a travois fashioned from pine poles and blankets. This is Tall Feather, Jacob introduced the older man. He's a healer among his people. He's agreed to help. Without waiting for further explanation, Tall Feather moved to Henry's side, examining the wound with practiced hands. His expression revealed nothing as he spoke to one of his companions in their native language. What is he saying? Beatrice asked anxiously. Jacob translated. The wound is bad, but he has seen worse heal. They will take him to their camp where he can use his medicines properly. Relief flooded through Beatrice. Thank you, she said directly to Tall Feather, putting all her gratitude into the simple words. The healer regarded her thoughtfully, then spoke again to Jacob. He asks if you are the man's wife, Jacob translated, looking slightly uncomfortable. Beatrice hesitated only briefly. Yes, she answered firmly. I am. This seemed to satisfy Tall Feather, who nodded and began directing the preparation of Henry for transport. They moved him carefully onto the travois, covering him with blankets against the cold mountain air. The journey to the Ute camp was slow and careful, with Tall Feather constantly checking Henry's condition. Beatrice walked alongside the travois, holding Henry's hand whenever the terrain allowed, speaking soft words of encouragement even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. The camp, when they reached it, was larger than Beatrice had expected. Several dozen hide-covered lodges arranged in a circular pattern around a central fire. Their arrival caused immediate curiosity, with women and children gathering to watch as Tall Feather directed Henry's transport to his own lodge. Inside, it was warm and smoky, with furs covering the ground and various pouches and bundles hanging from the lodge poles. Tall Feather's wife, a dignified woman with silver-streaked hair, immediately began assisting her husband, heating water and preparing various herbs and powders. Jacob explained that he needed to return to his family to report what had happened, but promised to come back in a few days to guide them the rest of the way to the Mormon settlement. Before leaving, he spoke at length with Tall Feather, apparently explaining Beatrice and Henry's situation. Left alone with the Ute healer and his wife, Beatrice felt strangely calm despite the language barrier between them. There was a quiet competence in their movements that inspired confidence as they worked over Henry, cleaning his wound more thoroughly than had been possible in the cave and applying a poultice of pungent herbs. Through a combination of gestures and the few words of English that Tall Feather knew, Beatrice understood that the next day would be critical. The infection had taken hold, and Henry's body would either fight it off or succumb. That night, she kept vigil beside him, joining Tall Feather's wife in bathing Henry's fevered body with cool cloths and helping to administer the bitter herbal tea the healer prepared whenever Henry was conscious enough to swallow. As dawn approached, Henry's fever peaked, his body burning so hot that Beatrice feared he would simply burn away before her eyes. He muttered deliriously, sometimes calling her name, other times speaking to people long dead, his parents, his wife Sarah, the baby daughter he had lost. In those dark hours, Beatrice prayed as she never had before, holding onto Henry's hand as if she could physically anchor him to this world through sheer force of will. "Stay with me," she whispered over and over. "Stay with me." Whether it was her prayers, Tall Feather's medicine, or Henry's own stubborn resilience, the fever finally broke as the sun rose. Beatrice felt the change beneath her hand, the burning heat gradually giving way to normal warmth, his breathing easing into a more natural rhythm. Tall Feather, checking Henry's condition, nodded with satisfaction. "He live," he pronounced in halting English. "Strong man, good spirit." Overcome with relief, Beatrice could only nod her thanks, tears streaming down her face as she continued to hold Henry's hand, feeling the steady pulse beneath her fingers like the most precious gift. For the next 3 days, Henry drifted in and out of consciousness as his body recovered from both the wound and the fever. Each time he woke, he seemed more lucid, his eyes seeking Beatrice first, then taking in their unfamiliar surroundings with quiet assessment. Ute camp. He asked during one of these periods of wakefulness, his voice weak but clear. "Yes," Beatrice confirmed, helping him sip some broth. "Jacob brought their healer to us. They saved your life, Henry." He nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "Need to thank them and repay their kindness somehow." "We will," she promised. "When you're stronger." By the 4th day, Henry was able to sit up with assistance, his natural vigor gradually returning despite the lingering weakness from his ordeal. Tall Feather seemed pleased with his recovery, nodding approvingly as he changed the dressing on the wound, which was now healing cleanly with no sign of infection. That evening, they were invited to join the communal meal around the central fire, an honor that Beatrice understood signified their acceptance by the tribe. Henry insisted on walking there himself, though he leaned heavily on her arm and moved with painful slowness. The gathering was a revelation to Beatrice, who had never before experienced Native American hospitality firsthand. Despite the language barrier, they were made welcome, offered choice portions of the roasted venison, and invited to listen as tribal elders shared stories that Jacob's cousin, a young woman who had married into the tribe, partially translated for them. When the meal was finished, Henry asked the cousin to translate his thanks to Tall Feather and the tribe for their life-saving assistance. The healer listened gravely, then responded at length. "He says that helping those in need is the way of his people," the cousin translated. "And that he saw in your eyes a good heart. He asks what you will do now." Henry glanced at Beatrice before answering. "Tell him we hope to reach Colorado territory where we can build a home and live in peace." When this was translated, Tall Feather nodded thoughtfully, then spoke again. "He says the journey is still dangerous for you," the cousin explained. "Whitaker's men have not given up the search. They have been asking questions among other settlements, offering money for information." Beatrice felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. "Does he think they will come here?" The cousin asked and received a firm headshake in response. "No, the Ute do not welcome such men in their territory, but you will need to be careful when you leave." Henry straightened, his face set with determination despite his weakness. "We've come too far to turn back now. Once I'm strong enough to travel, we'll continue north as planned." This decision seemed to meet with Tall Feather's approval. He spoke again, gesturing toward the mountains. "He says when you are ready, he will provide guides to take you safely through Ute territory," the cousin translated. "There are paths known only to his people that your enemies will not find." Gratitude welled in Beatrice's heart at this continued kindness from strangers who owed them nothing. "Please tell him we are deeply thankful for his generosity," she said, blinking back tears. As the gathering dispersed for the night, Henry and Beatrice returned slowly to the lodge they now shared, Henry's arm around her shoulders for support. Under the vast canopy of stars, with the distant howl of a wolf echoing through the mountains, Beatrice felt a curious sense of belonging not to this specific place, but to this moment, this journey, this man beside her. "What are you thinking?" Henry asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the most difficult paths lead us exactly where we need to be," she replied, looking up at him. I never would have chosen this journey with all its danger and uncertainty. But it led me to you, and for that, I can't regret any of it." Henry stopped walking, turning to face her despite the pain it clearly caused him. In the silver moonlight, his eyes held a depth of feeling that took her breath away. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not just the pretense for tall feathers' benefit. Truly marry me, Beatrice, as soon as we reach civilization." Though she had known they were moving toward this commitment, the direct proposal still caught her by surprise, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Henry Blackwood, I will marry you." His kiss was gentle but full of promise of healing, of future, of love that had somehow bloomed amidst the most unlikely circumstances. When they finally reached the lodge, exhaustion claimed them both. They slept side by side on the fur-covered ground, Henry's arm protectively around Beatrice, even in sleep, their breathing falling into the same rhythm as if they had always been together. For the next week, Henry focused on regaining his strength while Beatrice integrated herself into the daily life of the camp, learning from the women as they prepared food, tanned hides, and cared for children. Despite the language barrier, she found ways to communicate, eager to understand their ways and to contribute in return for their hospitality. One evening, as she sat with several women learning to bead a moccasin, Tall Feather's wife, Singing Brook, approached with a package wrapped in soft deerskin. Through gestures and the few English words she knew, the older woman indicated it was a gift for Beatrice. Unwrapping it carefully, Beatrice found a beautifully crafted dress of soft buckskin, decorated with intricate beadwork and porcupine quills. Overwhelmed by the gesture, she embraced Singing Brook, trying to convey her gratitude without words. The woman smiled, then pointed to Beatrice, then to Henry, who was sitting with some of the men nearby, making a circling motion with her finger before touching her heart. "I think she's giving you a wedding dress," explained the cousin who had witnessed the exchange. "She says she sees how you look at each other, that your hearts are already joined." Deeply moved, Beatrice carefully folded the dress, promising herself she would wear it when she and Henry finally spoke their vows, a blending of her new life with the unexpected friendship that had sustained them in their time of need. By the time Jacob returned, Henry was well enough to ride, though still not at full strength. The reunion with their young guide was joyful, with Jacob expressing amazement at Henry's recovery. "Didn't think I'd find you alive, to be honest," he admitted. "That wound looked bad." "It was," Henry acknowledged. "If not for Tall Feather and his people, I wouldn't be here now." Jacob brought news that Whitaker's search had indeed continued, but had shifted to the south, following false information that the McAllister clan had deliberately spread. "Pa's enjoying this more than he should," Jacob reported with a grin. "Says confounding Whitaker is the most fun he's had in years." With the immediate threat diminished and Henry's condition improved, they prepared for the final leg of their journey. Tall Feather, true to his word, provided 2 young warriors to guide them safely through the mountains to the Mormon settlement. The parting from the Ute camp was emotional, with Beatrice struggling to express her gratitude for the kindness that had saved Henry's life, and had shown her a way of life she had never before appreciated. Singing Brook pressed a small medicine pouch into her hands at the last moment, a protective charm, the cousin explained, to guard them on their journey. As they rode away from the camp, Beatrice carrying the precious buckskin dress carefully packed in her saddlebags, she felt both sadness at leaving and excitement for what lay ahead. The path to Colorado and freedom was now clear before them. The journey to the Mormon settlement was uneventful, their Ute guides leading them through hidden valleys and along game trails that kept them well away from the more traveled routes where Whitaker's men might be watching. By the time they reached the settlement 3 days later, Henry's strength had returned considerably, though he still tired more quickly than before his injury. The Mormons received them with the same hospitality they had come to expect in their journey, asking few questions but offering food, shelter, and the chance to rest in safety. It was here that they bid farewell to Jacob, who needed to return to his family. "You saved our lives," Beatrice told him as they said their goodbyes, We can never repay that debt." Jacob shook his head, embarrassed by her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Henry contradicted, clasping the young man's hand firmly. "They wouldn't have." "You're a good man, Jacob McAllister. If you ever find yourself in Colorado territory, you'll always have a place at our table." After Jacob's departure, they remained with the Mormon community for another week, allowing Henry to regain more of his strength before the final push to Colorado. During this time, they also sent letters East Beatrice to a former colleague in Boston who might help clear her name, and Henry to his contacts in Colorado who could prepare for their arrival. It was also during this time that they were legally married, in a simple ceremony performed by the settlement's elder. True to her promise to herself, Beatrice wore the buckskin dress gifted by Singing Brook, while Henry had somehow managed to procure a new shirt and had trimmed his beard for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Henry's voice steady and sure as he pledged himself to her, and Beatrice's heart so full she could barely speak her vows through happy tears. The small gathering of Mormon families who had come to know them during their stay celebrated with them afterward, sharing a feast and offering blessings for their journey ahead. That night, in the privacy of the small cabin they had been given, they came together as husband and wife, their lovemaking both tender and passionate, a physical expression of all they had endured together and all they hoped to build. "I never expected to find love again," Henry murmured as they lay entwined afterward, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Especially not in a canyon cave with a fugitive schoolteacher." Beatrice laughed softly, pressing a kiss to his chest, careful of the still healing wound. "And I never expected to fall in love while running for my life. Life has strange paths indeed." With spring fully established in the mountains, they set out for Colorado territory 2 days later, their horses rested and their supplies replenished. The journey north was peaceful compared to what had come before, with no sign of pursuit and the weather generally favorable. They crossed into Colorado territory 3 weeks after leaving the Mormon settlement, the majestic peaks of the Rocky Mountains rising before them like sentinels. The land began to change, with forests of pine and aspen replacing the desert scrub, meadows vibrant with wildflowers stretching between stands of timber. "It's beautiful," Beatrice breathed as they crested a rise, looking out over the valley below where a river wound like a silver ribbon through the green landscape. "That's our river," Henry said, pointing to the distant waterway. "Our land borders it for nearly a mile. The cabin's just beyond that stand of pines." "You never told me you already had a cabin," she said, surprised. He smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Wanted it to be a surprise. Built it 2 years ago, thinking someday I might settle down. Never quite got around to it until now." The cabin, when they finally reached it after another day's journey, was indeed a surprise larger and more substantial than Beatrice had expected, with a covered porch facing the river and windows that caught the afternoon light. Though dusty from disuse, it was well built and sound, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above. "It's perfect," Beatrice declared after they had explored it together, already envisioning curtains at the windows and flowers in the clearing outside. "It needs work," Henry cautioned, though he was clearly pleased by her reaction, "and it's a long way from anywhere. The nearest town is a day's ride." "Good," she said firmly. "After everything, a little solitude sounds like paradise." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, the river murmuring its eternal song below. Henry's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "What now, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked softly. Beatrice smiled at the still new sound of her married name. "Now we build our life, day by day." "I was thinking about what you said about teaching," Henry said, his voice thoughtful. "There are families scattered throughout this valley, children with no formal education, perhaps a school." She looked up at him, hope kindling in her eyes. He nodded. "We could build it right here on our land. Word would spread. Families would come." The idea took root immediately in Beatrice's heart. "Yes," she said, already envisioning it, "a place of learning, of safety, where every child is valued." Henry squeezed her gently. It won't be easy. The land demands hard work and winters are harsh here. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy, she replied, thinking of all they had endured to reach this moment. But together, I believe we can build something beautiful. As darkness fell, they moved inside, lighting lamps and building a fire in the stone hearth that formed the heart of their new home. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as they prepared a simple meal, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of those who have found their matching piece. Later, lying in the bed they would share for years to come, Beatrice whispered. Do you think Whitaker will ever find us here? Henry's arms tightened around her protectively. No, we're too far, too remote. And from what your Boston friend wrote back, the truth about Hargrove is already starting to emerge. Others have come forward with similar stories. Your name will be cleared in time. She nodded against his chest, allowing herself to believe in that future. Then this is truly our beginning. It is, he agreed, kissing her softly. And a fine one at that. Over the following months, they made the cabin truly their own. Henry built additional furniture with his own hands, a table large enough for future children to gather around, bookshelves for Beatrice's small but growing collection, a rocking chair for the porch where she could watch the mountains change with the seasons. Beatrice planted a garden, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the rich mountain soil. She learned to preserve food for the winter months, to identify edible plants in the forest, to shoot with accuracy when hunting was necessary for their table. By late summer, word of their presence had spread to the scattered homesteads in the valley, and families began to visit bringing gifts of food or handcrafted items, staying to share news and company. When Beatrice mentioned her background in teaching, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. We've been praying for a teacher, one mother told her, eyes bright with hope. My boys can barely write their names, and my girl has such a quick mind but nothing to feed it with. By fall, construction had begun on a small schoolhouse beside their cabin. Neighbors came to help, bringing tools and lumber, sharing meals as the building took shape. Henry worked alongside them, his pride in Beatrice evident to all as he spoke of her gift for teaching and her dedication to learning. The school opened with the first snowfall, a cozy one-room building with a sturdy stove and windows that Henry had specially ordered from Denver. 8 children attended that first day, ranging in age from 6 to 15, their faces alight with curiosity and excitement as Beatrice welcomed them. Standing in the doorway of his workshop, watching his wife lead her students in their first lesson, Henry felt a contentment he had never thought to experience again after the tragedies of his past. The journey that had brought them together with all its danger and uncertainty now seemed like a necessary path to this perfect destination. That evening, as they sat before the fire in their cabin, Beatrice resting against him while she reviewed her teaching notes for the next day, Henry said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said back in that hidden canyon." She looked up at him questioningly. "What did I say?" "That sometimes the most difficult paths lead us exactly where we need to be." He brushed a kiss against her temple. "You were right." Beatrice smiled, setting aside her notes to turn more fully toward him. "It's strange to think that if I hadn't hidden in that canyon cave, I would never have found you," Henry finished for her, "and never lit that fire that brought us here." "What fire?" she asked, momentarily confused. He smiled, touching her cheek gently. "The one that's been burning between us since the moment I saw you emerge from that cave brave and defiant despite everything you'd been through." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "The fire that guided us home," she murmured. "Exactly that," he agreed, drawing her closer. "And may it never go out." As winter settled fully over the valley, bringing deep snows that sometimes kept the students home, Beatrice and Henry established routines that sustained them through the long, cold months. Mornings found them working side by side, Beatrice preparing lessons or mending, Henry crafting furniture that was beginning to earn a reputation throughout the region for its quality and beauty. Afternoons were for teaching when the weather allowed the children to reach them, or for reading aloud to each other beside the fire when storms kept everyone home. Evenings were for music, Henry's surprisingly melodious voice joining Beatrice's as she played the small piano, he had somehow managed to transport to their mountain home as a Christmas surprise. Spring brought news from the East official word that all charges against Beatrice had been dropped, following testimony from several women who had experienced Hargrove's unwanted advances, and the confession of a clerk who had witnessed the banker's attack on her that fateful day. "You're free," Henry said, holding the letter from the territorial governor. Truly free. Beatrice took the paper from him, reading it with tears in her eyes. "We're free," she corrected gently. "Both of us." He looked at her questioningly. "You've been carrying this burden with me," she explained, taking his hand. "Risking everything for someone who was, legally speaking, a criminal. Now that weight is lifted from both our shoulders." Henry smiled, drawing her into his arms. "I never felt it as a burden, not for a moment." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Beatrice found the courage to share news of her own news she had been certain of for several weeks, but had held close, waiting for the right moment. "Henry," she whispered, guiding his hand to rest against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child." His sharp intake of breath was followed by a moment of stillness so complete that Beatrice could hear the distant hooting of an owl outside their window. Then his arms were around her, holding her with exquisite gentleness as if she had suddenly become infinitely precious and fragile. "A child," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." "Yes," she confirmed, her own voice trembling with joy. "Due in the fall, the doctor thinks." In the darkness, she felt rather than saw his tears as they mingled with her own tears of happiness, of gratitude, of wonder at how completely their lives had transformed in the space of a year. Their daughter was born as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, a strong, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. They named her Sarah Elizabeth, honoring both Henry's first wife and Beatrice's mother. Holding his daughter for the first time, Henry experienced a healing he had never thought possible, not a forgetting of the family he had lost, but a peace that came with the knowledge that love could expand to embrace both memory and new joy. As the seasons turned and years passed, their family and their school grew together. A son joined them 2 years after Sarah's birth, followed by twin girls 3 years later. The schoolhouse was expanded twice to accommodate the increasing number of children from throughout the valley, whose parents valued the education Beatrice provided. Henry's furniture business flourished, with pieces being commissioned from as far away as Denver and Santa Fe. The income allowed them to expand their home, adding rooms as their family grew and establishing a scholarship fund to help promising students continue their education beyond what Beatrice could provide. They never forgot those who had helped them during their desperate journey, maintaining correspondence with the McAllister clan, sending regular gifts to Tall Feathers people, and hosting Jacob when he finally took them up on their invitation to visit Colorado. On the 10th anniversary of the day Henry found Beatrice hiding in the canyon cave, they stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the meadow below. The oldest, Sarah, was teaching her younger siblings a game involving wildflowers and singing, already showing signs of her mother's gift for education. "Did you ever imagine this?" Beatrice asked, leaning into Henry's embrace as the setting sun gilded the scene before them. "That day when you followed my blood trail and found me half dead from fear and exhaustion." Henry shook his head, his beard now streaked with silver but his eyes still as vibrantly blue as when they first met. "Never in my wildest dreams. I just knew I couldn't leave you there." "Why?" she asked, a question she had posed many times over the years, always receiving a slightly different answer, each one a facet of their complex beginning. Today, his answer was simple. "Because even then, some part of me recognized what you were to become in my life. The fire that would warm me, the light that would guide me, the heart that would beat alongside mine." He kissed her softly. "My home." Beatrice smiled, returning his kiss with the same tenderness that had characterized their love from the beginning, a love forged in danger but sustained through peace, tested by hardship but strengthened by joy. "And you are mine," she whispered against his lips, certain that no matter what challenges the future might hold, They would face them as they had faced everything since that fateful day in the canyon together, with courage and unwavering faith in each other. As darkness fell, Henry lit the lamps in their home, the warm glow spilling out onto the porch where they lingered, reluctant to end this moment of reflection. Below, their children's laughter echoed up from the meadow, a sound that never failed to fill them both with profound gratitude. "Time to call them in," Beatrice said finally, but her voice held no urgency. These precious moments watching their children play in the safety of the home they had built together were never taken for granted. Henry nodded, but before he could call out, he turned to her once more, framing her face with gentle hands. "I love you, Beatrice Blackwood, more with each passing day." Her smile, as radiant now as when he first earned it in a hidden canyon a decade earlier, was his answer that, and the kiss that followed, carrying all the passion and tenderness that had sustained them through their extraordinary journey from desperate strangers to beloved partners in a life neither could have imagined, but both had helped create. "And I love you," she replied when they finally broke apart. "My cowboy who found me when I was lost and lit a fire that has never gone out." Together, they called their children home as twilight deepened into night, the stars emerging one by one above their mountain valley constant, bright and enduring, much like the love that had guided them home.